Hello, everyone, and welcome to Spaceflight Now's latest coverage of this live mission set to lift off from Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. I'm Will Robinson Smith, reporter with Spaceflight Now. Good to be with you once again here, broadcasting from the Spaceflight Now News Bureau at NASA's Kennedy Space Center. You're taking a live look at SpaceX's Falcon 9 rocket, set to be the 130th to fly for the company so far in 2025. On board are 28 of SpaceX's Starlink V2 mini satellites, adding to the constellation of about 8,600 currently in low Earth orbit. We're just about 58 and a half minutes away from this rocket taking flight. Certainly appreciate all of you who either stayed up late or got up early to be with us for this live launch coverage. See, there's about 200 of you at this early odd hour here on the East Coast of the United States. Welcome on in. Get nice and settled as we count down towards liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket. As we're getting rolling here, if you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button, sharing the stream to allow some more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage as we roll on through the count. Our photographer, John Pisani, alongside Spaceflight Now editor Stephen Young, are running the technical operations of this broadcast today. Photographer Adam Bernstein out and about in the field, making sure all the cameras are nicely framed up and in focus, preparing to track the Falcon 9 as it makes its ascent from Space Launch Complex 40 there at the Cape. Be sure to follow our full photography team. You can find them at their handles here on the screen on X. Adam is at aburn NYC. Michael is at MD Kane Jr. John is at John Pisani Photo. While you're there, be sure to follow Spaceflight Now simply at Spaceflight Now if you're not already. You can also find us on Threads, Blue Sky, and Facebook if you yourself are not on X. We're also joined this morning with tracking support by our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs with C&J Images. Bit of a breezy morning today, but not so prohibitively that it looks like it would be preventative for a flight. But you can see just in the upper right-hand corner of the screen, the American flag blowing pretty consistently there at the flagpole here at the Kennedy Space Center press site. Heading into this launch opportunity, the 45th Weather Squadron forecast a 95% chance for favorable conditions here at the pad, with just a scant chance for interference from cumulus clouds during this launch opportunity. Meteorologists were tracking moderate conditions in the booster recovery area on a risk scale of low to moderate to high, and did highlight that quite literally in their launch weather forecast. That is the case both today as well as tomorrow, if for whatever reason SpaceX decides that it's unable to launch this mission tonight or this morning, however you want to think about it. With just about 55 minutes on the clock, do you want to thank our moderator in the live chat, Aussie Space Girl, joining us from Australia, helping us out in the chat, given the odd hour for a lot of our other mods. Appreciate you, Stephanie. Thanks for being with us. Also, thanks to channel member Cumulus Granatus for hopping back in the chat after helping us out last night as well to answer folks' questions. This and every other live launch opportunity is made possible in no small part thanks to our wonderful channel member community here on YouTube. So a big thanks to folks for their ongoing support, like Butterfly, the Roddy Mom, Sulfur for Lunch, Adam Wilson, and many, many others. Southeast Aviation Media, good morning. Richard W., hello, hello. Good morning to Dreamweaver and Kyle M. Channel membership comes with a number of perks, including discounts at our online shop, which is shop.spaceflightnow.com. access to member-only videos here on YouTube, access to our members-only Discord server, and of course the ability to watch all of our live launch liftoff moments from here in Florida in 4K. To that end, I want to welcome in new channel members Lisa Stevenson and Shannon joining us with membership at the pad leader level, and Bill Bunting joining us at the mission specialist level. Welcome into all of you. Thanks for hopping aboard. Last little bit of housekeeping. If you have a comment or question about this mission or other goings on in the realm of space or spaceflight, you can use the YouTube Super Chat feature to have your comment or query elevated for discussion. Taking a nice look at the waning crescent moon here, courtesy of our friends Chuck and Jen Briggs, checking in from the Titusville area this morning. A nice view of our Earth Zone satellite. Of course, this will be the destination for the Artemis 2 mission. Not a landing of with those astronauts who are going to be the first four riding aboard the Orion spacecraft, but making a big loop around the moon before heading back to Earth for a splashdown in the Pacific Ocean less than 10 days after liftoff. If all the initial checkouts go according to plan with the Orion spacecraft. Of course, this being the first time crew are on board, this is a part of the test campaign for the future Artemis missions. Of course, Artemis 3 is set to be the big first landing attempt for the Artemis program, but Artemis 2, an important stepping stone on the way to getting humans back to the moon, since they'll be the first to check out the various crew-involved systems on board Orion, like the life support systems and some of the manual steering capabilities for the Orion spacecraft. They'll do some proximity operations following separation from the interim cryogenic propulsion stage after a liftoff. They'll make about one orbit around the Earth before making that final big call for the translunar insertion burn, TLI burn. Because of the trajectory of the Artemis 2 mission, that'll set the course for the rest of their flight that commits them to heading out to the moon and back. For now, though, staying a little closer to home with the Falcon 9 rockets set to lift off from Pad 40. Let's go ahead and talk about the countdown timeline, the mission milestones that are still ahead for SpaceX as they're planning to launch this Falcon 9 here in just a little less than 51 minutes from now. Of course, the first order of the morning is the readiness poll to determine that they are good to go with the start of prop load. That happens at about T-minus 38 minutes. SpaceX does their readiness poll electronically, so if they're in a good position, they can take that determination a little bit earlier than the 38-minute mark. Broadly speaking, though, once the go-ahead is given, fueling of the Falcon 9 will start at T-minus 35 minutes with a loading of RP-1, a rocket-grade kerosene aboard the Falcon 9's first and second stages. At the same time, liquid oxygen will begin flowing on board the rocket's booster. T-minus 30 minutes is when SpaceX starts to load a cryogenic helium on board the pressure vessels for the Falcon 9's first stage. Same is true on the second stage a few minutes after that. That helium is important because it's used to pressurize the main propellant tanks during flight. T-minus 23 minutes is when the second stage kerosene tank is full. And T-minus 20 minutes and 50 seconds is when the Strongback chill down process gets underway. SpaceX thermally conditions the feed lines at the pad prior to loading liquid oxygen on board the rocket's second stage. At about T minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds, we'll start to see the so-called big vent from the Strongback. Good visual indication that things are progressing as expected. That vent will last just shy of 4 minutes before it tapers off, setting things up for LOX to start flowing at T minus 16 minutes. Moving right along at T minus 7 minutes. It's when the chill down of the 9 Merlin engines gets underway. This involves flowing a small amount of liquid oxygen through the plumbing and turbo pumps, helping to protect those engines from the risk of thermal shock and damage during startup. At about T minus 6 minutes is when the first stage kerosene tank should be full. Then at T minus 4.5 minutes, we'll see the Strongback retract sequence begin. First, the clamp arms just beneath the payload fairings will open up, and then the transporter erector, otherwise referred to as the Strongback, that will recline a few degrees away from the Falcon 9 rocket and stay in that position until liftoff. At that point, it'll pull back in a much more rapid fashion to clear the way for the vertical climb of the Falcon 9. 3 minutes before takeoff, the first stage liquid oxygen tank should be full. At T minus 2 minutes, same will be true on the second stage. At that point, the Falcon 9 rocket is fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. In the final 60 seconds, as we hear the call that the Falcon 9 has entered into its automated startup, control of the countdown is handed over from the ground sequencer to the Falcon 9's onboard flight computers, and the propellant tanks are brought up to flight pressure. SpaceX launch director will then give their go for launch call at T minus 45 seconds. The engine ignition command is issued at T minus 3 seconds. And if all 9 Merlin engines are healthy and ignite as expected, the command will be given for the hold down clamps to release the Falcon 9 rocket for a T0 liftoff. Coming up here this morning at 5:27 a.m. Eastern, 09:27 UTC, or just about 46.5 minutes from now. Time now, T minus 45 minutes, 35 seconds and counting. The Falcon 9 first stage booster that is flying today's mission is tail number B1095, which will be flying for just its third time. So far from making its entry into the Falcon 9 Frequent Flyers Club, here's where things currently stand for SpaceX with its most flown boosters. And a look at the bar chart following the launch of the Space Development Agency's Tranche 1 Transport Layer C mission last night. Presumed to be a success given the launch photos shared by SpaceX and the quick note from Lockheed Martin Space, though because of the ongoing government shutdown here in the United States at the federal level, the Space Development Agency themselves have not so far issued a statement regarding the launch. But presumably all went well with that mission. Taking a quick peek at the live chassis, there's some uh, chatter about the timing for the Artemis 2 mission. Right now, it has a no earlier than February 5th launch date. They have just a few days each month as currently slated right now, although that is in the process of being refined. Taking a beat to talk about the payload that's on board this Falcon 9 rocket here this morning. Talking 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites. This set to be SpaceX's 92nd launch of 2025 that features Starlink satellites. For the vast majority of the year, SpaceX has been launching what are known as the V2 mini optimized satellites, weighing considerably less than their predecessor V2 minis. With their solar panels unfurled, they have a wingspan of about 100 feet or 30 meters. They use argon Hall effect thrusters for in-orbit maneuvering. Built up in Redmond, Washington, these satellites today will be deployed at about 172 miles or 277 kilometers in altitude at a 53-degree inclination. And thanks to the recent flight of Starship Flight 11, SpaceX shared a new graphic, which we'll show you in just a minute here. But as compared to the predecessor satellites, the version 1.5s, the V2 minis have 4 times the capacity. They introduced E-band for backhaul. They featured an upgraded phased array antenna. They're about 2.6 times heavier as it initially rolled out than the version 1.5s. And the argon Hall effect thrusters replaced the previously used krypton thrusters. Here's a look into the future as SpaceX, as planned next year, will start deploying the version 3 edition of their Starlink satellites, quite a bit larger than the V2 minis, especially with those larger extended solar arrays. These will be deployed from Starship, though we don't know the exact timing of the first Starlink mission with an orbital class version of the integrated Starship Super Heavy rocket. Bill Gerstenmaier, the president or vice president of build and flight reliability at SpaceX, noted at the Glenn Symposium last month up in Columbus, Ohio, that they will fly a suborbital version 3 Starship mission as their first launch, lifting off from Pad B down there at Starbase in Texas. And then if all goes well with that, then they will probably fly the next mission. So that would be Flight 13 as their first orbital attempt. Obviously, lots of things to prepare in between now and then, but this gives you a sense of scale for one of the primary payloads that will be flying on board Starship, as the current edition of Starlink, the V2 minis, are the primary payload for SpaceX's current workhorse, the Falcon 9. Time now is T minus 38 minutes, 15 seconds and counting. We're approaching the point, generally speaking, when the SpaceX launch director will make a call on the start of prop load for today's mission. Once the go-ahead is given, fueling will start at T minus 35 minutes. As we're waiting for the beginning of fueling for this Falcon 9 rocket, just take a brief moment to talk about the booster history for this particular Falcon 9 first stage. It will only take a brief moment because this booster's only flown twice before. Its first outing was back on May 21st with the Starlink 12-15 mission. That was followed by Starlink 10-56 on August 27th. Of course, 10-52 is next up to bat, coming about 50 days after its last outing. This is far from the fastest turnaround for Falcon 9 first stage booster. That distinction would be the 9-day turnaround record, still currently held by B1088. And that was because it was following the launch of NASA's Sphere-X and Punch missions, which had a landing zone touchdown, followed by another landing zone recovery with the NROL 57 mission. So it's a little bit easier to have a zippier turnaround when there are no drone ships involved and you're not dealing with both the transit time of getting out to the recovery zone and back into port. Of course, a little bit less potential saltwater impacts as well. 36 minutes on the clock at this point in the countdown. We're just about a minute away from SpaceX starting the fueling process with its Falcon 9 rocket, assuming all is still moving along on track and the go-ahead was given for the start of tanking. Taking a look at our live chat here. I want to thank Scrummer for a $2 super chat, sharing a sentiment shared by, I know, a lot of folks here on Florida's Space Coast with their love of turtles. One of the benefits of living along the coastline here is this is one of the most popular spots for sea turtle nesting, and that has obviously good and bad implications given the presence of sea turtles here. They sometimes suffer some injuries that are sometimes caused by fishing or boating accidents, and there's a sea turtle hospital at the Brevard Zoo, just a little bit south of the Kennedy Space Center. The hospital is not accessible to the public, though once those turtles are rehabilitated and ready to go back out into the wild, assuming a number of factors, but typically they're able to hold a public release ceremony so people can see the turtle that has gone through its rehabilitation get slowly taken back down to the waters, and then it's a blink and you'll miss it moment when it scurries out and it's back out into the Atlantic. But it's pretty cool to see those creatures up close. Now, just under 34 minutes away from the launch of this Falcon 9 rocket. At this point, we should be about a minute into the fueling process. Taking a closer look at the base of the Falcon 9 rocket, we hope to see some good visual indication of the start of the fueling campaign. Thankfully, this is a fairly new booster as far as reuse for SpaceX, having flown just twice before. We can still very clearly make out the lettering of SpaceX, and just beneath the X is where we should start to see a bit of a frost line form as the super cold densified liquid oxygen begins to flow on board the rocket's booster. Given the difference in temperature between that super cold LOX and the considerably warmer and more humid Florida air, we should also start to see some vapor in that region of the rocket as well. Given the heat distortion between our camera and the rocket itself, it's more likely going to be the vapor as opposed to the frost line that we're able to spot first and make that determination that tanking is in fact underway. Now, T minus 31 minutes, 30 seconds in counting. We are starting to see that frost line form and the vapor in that region of the rocket I was talking about, which is a good visual indication that SpaceX is, in fact, starting tanking or is underway with the tanking process, committing them to make that T0 launch attempt at 5:27 a.m. Eastern, 0927 UTC. Time now 29 minutes, 13 seconds remaining on the clock. If you're just now joining us, SpaceX is in the midst of fueling its Falcon 9 rocket there at Space Launch Complex 40 at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station. The mission du jour is the Starlink 10-52 mission, set to take 28 Starlink V2 mini satellites up into low Earth orbit. Certainly appreciate the more than 370 of you who are watching along with us live at this point in the count. If you haven't already, you could do us a big favor just by clicking that like button and sharing the stream to allow some more folks that are up early along with us be part of this live launch coverage. Speaking of being part of the coverage, want to thank K2 Hat for a $5 super chat, saying good morning, Will and all. Thanks for the coverage again. Coffee time. Yes, much of our Spaceflight Now family is caffeinated up and ready to support this launch opportunity. Myself, I've got some lemon tea with honey, which is preferable for me with the launch broadcast. Helps to keep the voice in good working order for the next 27 plus minutes as we're continuing to count down and through the initial stage in flight. Of course, this being a Starlink mission, SpaceX will cut off onboard camera views shortly after the booster lands on the drone ship. Speaking of which, today SpaceX will be using the vessel called Just Read the Instructions, which is stationed off the coast of South Carolina, getting ready to catch B-1095 about 8.5 minutes post liftoff. Time now, T minus 25 minutes, 14 seconds and counting. As we're approaching the start of the so-called big vent from there, the Strongback, as SpaceX thermally conditions the feed lines prior to second stage LOX load. Let's go ahead and talk about the post-liftoff timeline, the sequence of events for a good liftoff through deployment of the Falcon 9 rocket. Of course, starting with the liftoff at 5:27 a.m. Eastern, 09:27 UTC. The rocket will pass through max Q, which is the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle, about a minute 12 seconds after takeoff. SpaceX will then thermally condition the Merlin vacuum engine on the rocket's upper stage, and then we'll hit a few events in fairly rapid succession. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, otherwise referred to as MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds, followed by stage separation, and then the ignition of the Merlin vacuum engine a few seconds after that. The payload fairings that are currently encapsulating the Starlink satellites no longer needed at that point in the flight, gone through enough of the atmosphere to be jettisoned, and they'll be recovered a little bit further downrange from when the booster lands on the drone ship. Roughly 3 minutes after that is when the roughly 26-second first stage entry burn begins. SpaceX kicking back on 3 out of the 9 Merlin 1D engines at the base of the booster to start to slow that stage of the rocket down quite considerably. Nearly 2 minutes after that, SpaceX will start the landing burn, a single engine which will take booster 1095 down to what SpaceX plans for a soft touchdown on the drone chip. Just read the instructions nearly 8.5 minutes after takeoff. That'll be followed by the conclusion of the first burn of that Merlin vacuum engine on the second stage. At that point, the rocket's upper stage will go on a coast phase until about T plus 54 minutes and 36 seconds. And there will be a roughly 2-second burn of that upper stage engine to circularize its orbit, setting things up for the deployment of those 28 Starlink satellites at about T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, and 58 seconds after liftoff. As you mentioned, SpaceX has long since stopped sharing live deployment of its Starlink satellites, but here's a video shared by them from a previous Starlink mission that shows you what the deployment sequence looks like. All the Starlink satellites are released simultaneously, and then they slowly drift apart and assume their correct orbital position after unfurling their solar panels. You can see a nice reflection of the upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket in one of those V2 minis as they slowly drift away from the Falcon 9. Give you one last glimpse at that with this loop. Here's a still image of what they look like a little bit further away from the rocket's upper stage. Following the deployment of those Starlink satellites, there will be one final deorbit burn to drive the upper stage of the Falcon 9 back into the atmosphere where it's designed to burn up and help eliminate the risk of creating unnecessary space debris on this mission. Now, currently T-minus 23 minutes, about 50 seconds and counting. SpaceX is approaching the start of that big vent, getting ready to thermally condition those feed lines there at the pad. Now, that process is underway. The venting itself starts at T-minus 20 minutes and 20 seconds. And there's that vent. Now, T minus 16 minutes, 30 seconds and counting. You can see the big vent has tapered off. Second stage LOX load is just about to begin. We're now T minus 13 minutes, 41 seconds and counting. Taking a quick peek at the chat. Appreciate the nearly 680 of you now that are watching along with us live. If you haven't already, now's as good a time as any to click that like button and share the stream to allow us more folks to find their way into this live launch coverage. As we're getting ready to see SpaceX launch what will be their 130th Falcon 9 rocket so far this year, now is as good a time as any to talk about the workhorse vehicle for SpaceX, the Falcon 9. This rocket stands at 70 meters or 229 feet in height, has a diameter of 3.66 meters or 12 feet. Majority of that, of course, is the rocket's first stage. This booster, as we've discussed earlier in the broadcast, is B1095, making its third trip to space and back today. At the base of the booster are 9 Merlin 1D engines, which burn a rocket-grade kerosene and liquid oxygen, producing 1.7 million pounds of thrust at liftoff. Around the engine compartment are the black carbon fiber landing legs that are used to land the first stage on the drone ship. Today, SpaceX will use the vessel called Just Read the Instructions. Above the first stage is the inner stage. This is a composite structure consisting of an aluminum honeycomb core, which is surrounded by carbon fiber. In that image on the right-hand side of your screen, you can see the deployable hypersonic grid fins. These are titanium winglets that provide stability and steering for the Falcon 9 as it comes back through the atmosphere, tail first like a big old dart heading towards the drone ship. At the top of the inner stage are 3 mechanical latches that attach to the vehicle's second stage, and at first stage main engine cutoff, high-pressure helium is used to release those latches, and 4 pneumatic pushers ensure a clean separation. Also, the second stage engine nozzle is safely housed inside the interstage adapter until the point of stage separation. Speaking of that second stage, the upper stage of the Falcon 9, powered by a single modified Merlin engine called a Merlin vacuum engine or an MVac engine. It's equipped with a large nozzle which is optimized for burns in the vacuum of space, hence the name. It produces more than 220,500 pounds of thrust, and it will be fired twice on today's flight to place the 28 Starlink satellites into their intended orbit. Like with the booster, the upper stage of the Falcon 9 also burns RP-1 and LOX. And following deployment of the Starlink satellites, like we showed you with the video, there will be one final deorbit burn to drive the upper stage back into the atmosphere where it burns up, helping to reduce the risk for space debris. Finally, at the top of the Falcon 9 stack are the payload fairings, currently encapsulating those 28 Starlink satellites. The fairings are made up of a carbon composite material and stand at 13.1 meters or 43 feet in height and are 5.2 meters or 17.1 feet in diameter. The two halves of the payload fairing will be recovered a little bit further downrange from where the first stage lands on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. And they gently splash down under the support of steerable parachutes. Just passing the 10-minute point in the countdown. In less than 3 minutes now, SpaceX will start the engine chill sequence to prepare those 9 Merlin 1D engines for the start of their initial burn. With less than 9 minutes remaining on the clock before the planned liftoff of this Falcon 9 rocket, let's go ahead and talk about where it's going to fly once it does leave the pad. Talking a little trajectory here. Falcon 9 rocket going to be taken off from Space Launch Complex 40 here at Cape Canaveral Space Force Station and flying on a northeasterly trajectory, similar to what we saw with the Kuiper mission earlier this week. Following stage separation, the first stage booster will target that touchdown on the drone ship. Just read the instructions. Less than 8.5 minutes after liftoff. SpaceX is working to certify its first stage boosters as well as the payload fairings for up to 40 flights apiece. So SpaceX will also endeavor to recover those fairing halves, bring them back through Port Canaveral on one of its recovery vessels, off to the Hangar X site where they will be refurbished and turned around for future missions. Now past the start of engine chill. Coming up next, the first stage RP1 tank should be full in about 20 seconds. We shall also be getting pad level views of the Falcon 9 rocket here in just about a minute, as well as mission audio. Taking a peek at the live chat. Let us know where you're watching from today. See some folks, of course, from around Florida. Aaron Vago is checking in from Jupiter, Wilma B, and Brooksville. Let us know where you're watching from. And a question for me from Woo Alone saying, Will, when do you sleep? Sleep when there's not a launch. That's basically the simplest way to put it these days. Kind of the same mentality as new parents. When the baby is asleep, you sleep. When there's not a launch, you get as much rest as you can.
Tanks are pressing for Strongback retract.
And good audio there, good visual of the Falcon 9 from Space Launch Complex 40 there at the pad.
Strongback retract has started.
Good confirmation there. You may start to hear some additional hissing sounds as SpaceX continues the tanking process and preparing the rocket for flight. There you see the clamp arms just beneath the fairing halves opening up, and that large truss structure, the Strongback, will soon start moving away from the Falcon 9 rocket. You can just barely make it out that it's starting to inch away from the launch vehicle. And Woola 1, thank you for clarifying. Should be hearing a call momentarily for the conclusion of first stage liquid oxygen load.
Stage 1 LOX load complete.
There's that good call. We should hear a similar call regarding the second stage at about T minus 2 minutes. T minus 2 minutes and counting.
Stage 2 LOX load complete.
And with that good call, the Falcon 9 rocket is now fully loaded with 1 million pounds of propellant. The venting you're seeing just beginning are the ground gas closeouts. SpaceX releases the remaining liquid oxygen from the feed lines there at the pad.
Gas launch closeouts.
With that good call, next, as we reach the final minute in the count, we should hear the SpaceX folks call that the rocket has entered into its automated startup at about T-minus 1 minute.
Falcon 9 is in startup.
And with that call, we're just waiting for the SpaceX launch director to confirm that they are in fact go for launch.
LD, go for launch.
And with that good call, we're just about 30 seconds away from the flight of this Falcon 9 rocket, again heading on a northeasterly trajectory. "20 seconds. 15 seconds. And here we go in 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Engine ignition and liftoff. Liftoff of the Falcon 9 rocket on the Starlink 10-52 mission. Falcon 9 has cleared the tower. Now passing a minute into the mission, the rocket is approaching max Q, the point of greatest aerodynamic pressure on the vehicle. Now through max Q, SpaceX will throttle back up on those engines. Coming up on MVAC chill.
MVAC chill.
With the thermal conditioning of the Merlin vacuum engine now underway, we're approaching those rapid events coming up here momentarily. We'll see first stage main engine cutoff, or MECO, at about T plus 2 minutes and 24 seconds, followed by stage separation and then the ignition of that Merlin vacuum engine. A little more than 2 minutes into the flight. Less than 20 seconds to MECO. Here we have MECO.
MECO.
Stage separation.
Stage separation confirmed.
MVAC startup.
And good onboard camera views of those events. We're coming up next to fairing separation, which we should see first in the big box. And there go those payload fairings.
Fairing separation confirmed.
Nice view of the 28 Starlink satellites on board. Those fairing halves will splash down in the waters of the Atlantic Ocean under the support of steerable parachutes following their atmospheric reentry. We're about 3.5 minutes into the mission so far. All appears to be moving nominally with this Falcon 9 flight. coming up next in about 2.5 minutes will be the start of the 3-engine entry burn, where SpaceX will start to kick on the brakes and slow down the first stage quite considerably in preparation for the forthcoming landing burn after that to take it down to the drone ship. Falcon booster well past the Kármán line at 114 kilometers in altitude and still continuing to climb. Looks like it's topping out at about 115 kilometers in altitude, now making its descent towards the drone ship. Just read the instructions. Bit of tricky tracking this morning. Now about 5 minutes into the flight. Less than a minute away from the start of that entry burn. As we take a look up through the inner stage at the top of the Falcon booster there on the left-hand side of your screen. Appears to be a nominal burn of the Merlin vacuum engine there on the right so far. Just about 10 seconds to the start of the entry burn now.
Stage 1 FTS is saved.
Stage 1 entry burn startup.
And there's Adam with the entry burn. Well done. Entry burn shut down in real time.
Stage 1 entry burn shut down.
And with the conclusion of that entry burn, SpaceX now turns to the start of the landing burn, which is set to begin just a little bit ahead of the 8-minute mark in this mission. So about a minute from now.
Stage 1 transonic.
Stage 2 is in terminal guidance.
Stage 1 landing burn. Landing lid deploy. Stage 1 landing confirmed.
And a good recovery of B1095.
Stage 2 FTS is saved.
MVAC shutdown.
Nominal orbit insertion.
And a good confirmation of that nominal orbit insertion following MVAC shutdown. The upper stage of the Falcon 9 rocket will now enter into this coast phase, which will last until about T plus 54 minutes and 36 seconds. There will be a brief 2-second burn to circularize its orbit ahead of deployment of the Starlink satellites at about T plus 1 hour, 3 minutes, 58 seconds post liftoff. And with a good liftoff and landing of the first stage booster, going to go ahead and turn now to our mission stats as things currently stand. Kicking things off, that was the third flight of Falcon 9 booster 1095 in the SpaceX fleet. This was the 547th Falcon 9 launch to date, the 130th of the year so far. This was SpaceX's 482nd Falcon booster reflight, with a launch of a booster that has flown at least once. This was also the company's 166th orbital launch within the last 365 days, the 284th from Pad 40, and the 339th overall orbital launch from this pad as well. Here's a look at the Falcon bar chart here, just 4 missions shy of catching 2024's total. Moving on to some recovery stats, that was the 138th good landing on the drone ship called Just Read the Instructions, marking SpaceX's 423rd good drone ship landing so far to date, and the 519th booster landing for SpaceX. Finally, with some industry stats, this was the 86th orbital launch from Florida so far this year, the 137th from U.S. soil. Just pausing for a moment to note that last year there were a total of 93 orbital launches from Florida. So we're also very close to eclipsing the record number of orbital launches from the Sunshine State. Moving on, this was the 149th orbital launch from a U.S. rocket company and the 235th orbital launch attempt around the globe, following a launch of a Long March 8A mission earlier today from China, marking their 60th flight this year. Around the globe, there have been 5 orbital launch mishaps. Here's where the pie chart now currently stands. Peeking back at the live chat, sounds like a lot of folks had some good launch viewing from here in Central Florida and further on up north, so that's always good to hear. Now ready for those launch replays. We start things off with the fixed view here at the press site from our Adam Bernstein. coming up to the tail end of this replay, just sticking with it through fairing separation, which should be coming up here in just a few moments. When you see those fairings jettison here, right about, there you go. You can see them interacting with the plume of the Merlin vacuum engine, which creates that little bit of nebula effect. And that'll do it for this live coverage of the Starlink 10-52 mission. A good liftoff and good landing, and some good replays now in the books. Want to thank our moderator, Aussie Space Girl, for holding it down solo in the live chat today. Also, thanks to Cumulus Granatus for helping to answer folks' questions in the chat. Big ups to our photography team of Adam and John for some stellar work there. And to John and Stephen for running the technical operations of the broadcast today. If you're not following our photography team, you can find them at their handles here on X. John is at Champasani Photo, Adam is at Aburn NYC, and Michael Kane at MD Kane Jr. Now's a good time to make sure you're following the photographer, since we do have a number of notable missions with some good photography prospects coming up in these final months of 2025. Of course, we've got on deck an Atlas V launch with the Viasat 3 F2 mission set to launch no earlier than later this month from Space Launch Complex 41 from ULA. Also on tap, potentially one, if not maybe two more Vulcan rockets also lifting off from that same pad. We're also looking towards the Escapade mission from Blue Origin. That's a NASA mission sending two satellites on their way to Mars. And of course, plenty of Falcon 9 rockets dotted along the way in the interim. Wrapping things up here, want to thank as well you for wherever you've been watching from. We certainly appreciate your time and attention this morning, especially in these very early morning hours here on the East Coast and as well as across the rest of the United States. For all of us here at Spaceflight Now, I'm Will Robinson Smith. Remember, be good to yourselves, be good to others. We will see you next time, folks. Be sure to like and subscribe on your way out the digital door. And until next time, bye-bye.